I came back from my week-long hiking trip to find soggy wine glasses, soggier towels, and something worse. Karen from the HOA had been hosting parties in my hot tub. Without asking. Without shame. So I did what any sane man would do. I turned my luxury spa into a trap filled with blue dye and chili oil. You should have seen her scream. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen-backed fake HOA plays militia in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. So how did we get from a relaxing backyard hot tub to a neighborhood Cold War fueled by spa sabotage and questionable plumbing ethics? Let's rewind. The week before the chili oil incident, I had just returned from 7 glorious, phone-silent days hiking in Yosemite. Nature. No people. No cell service. No Karens. Heaven. But the moment I stepped into my backyard, something was off. There was a trail of wet footprints on my stone path, a wine cork wedged into a crack in the deck, and 2 soaking wet beach towels draped over my lawn chairs like drunken flags of surrender. That would have been weird enough, but then I noticed my hot tub cover wasn't on right. It was tilted, half-hanging, like someone tried to put it back in a rush. Now, I may not be a detective, but when you drop 12 grand on a luxury spa to soothe your post-divorce stress and suddenly find it full of someone else's Chardonnay backwash, your brain connects dots real fast. I checked the water. Lukewarm. Lower than it should be. And there were smudges on the edge of the tub. Not mine. That's when I pulled out my phone and checked the security cam footage from the motion sensor I'd installed on a whim last month. That's when I saw her. Karen. Head of the HOA. The same woman who once sent me a formal letter about my mailbox being too modern in aesthetic for the neighborhood. There she was, in full glory. Sun hat, leopard print swimsuit, and a glass of wine that probably cost more than her integrity, sinking into my tub like she owned it. She wasn't alone either. 3 other women, all with HOA name tags, clinked glasses and laughed like they were at a damn spa retreat. I blinked, rewound, checked the timestamp. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. 4 times that week, while I was halfway up a mountain, this suburban mafia had turned my backyard into their personal Napa Valley. She even brought a Bluetooth speaker and a charcuterie board. I'm not even joking. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she thought I'd given permission. Oh viewer. Sweet, trusting viewer. If you've never dealt with an HOA Karen, let me explain how their minds work. If it's not nailed down and you didn't explicitly say no in blood and notarized font, they think it's fair game. And even if you do say no, they might fine you for being unneighborly. So I marched across the street, footage loaded on my phone, ready for a confrontation. I knocked. She opened the door, all smiles and pearls. Jake. Welcome back. Hope the trip was nice. I didn't even get a word in before she said, "Oh, by the way, I hope you don't mind, we made some good use of your tub while you were away. It just seemed like a shame to let it sit unused." Let it sit unused? My jaw almost fell into her begonias. "I mind," I said, as calmly as I could, though my left eye was twitching. "It's private property. You had no right to be back there." She gave a little laugh, the kind people give when they think you're being dramatic. "Oh come now. Don't be so uptight. You weren't even here." I was halfway through crafting a sarcastic comeback when she added, "Actually, I sent out a little thank you to the neighborhood. Hope you don't mind." I did mind. Deeply. And I minded even more when I saw the thank you in question, an HOA newsletter titled Soak Up the Summer, featuring a full paragraph about our wonderful neighbor Jake, who generously allowed us to host Wind Down Wednesdays in his beautiful spa space. I didn't know whether to scream or sue. That night, I sat on my deck, staring at my violated tub like it had cheated on me. My jets felt betrayed. My chlorine felt soiled. And then it hit me, This wasn't about one tub. Karen had been doing stuff like this for months. She once tried to fine another neighbor for planting sunflowers that didn't match the neighborhood color palette. She sent a warning letter to an elderly couple for hanging wind chimes that might exceed noise ordinance levels. She wasn't just entitled. She was the neighborhood tyrant. The kicker? My house wasn't even under her HOA's jurisdiction. I was on the edge of the development, technically not part of the charter, which meant she had zero authority over me or my property. And that meant everything she'd done, from sneaking into my yard to publishing my name in an HOA document, was completely out of line. I decided to look into the HOA charter. And what I found made me laugh, then seethe. Karen had been bluffing authority over non-members for years. Most people just didn't question her, afraid she'd bury them in bureaucratic nonsense. But not me. Not anymore. See, I'm not just a guy with a hot tub. I'm a systems engineer. My job is literally to find creative solutions to complex problems under pressure. And Karen had just become a very satisfying problem to solve. The next morning, I put together a plan. One that would strike the perfect balance between legal compliance and delicious, untraceable pettiness. And it started with a quick trip to the pool supply store. There, I picked up a bottle of tracer dye. The kind that turns pool water bright blue if someone leaks it, but is totally harmless and nearly impossible to wash off immediately. Then I swung by the spice shop and got a little bottle of ghost pepper chili oil concentrate. 2 drops of that in bathwater? Itch City. But I wasn't done. I upgraded my security cameras, installed motion-triggered lights, and just to be sure, I scheduled a fake out-of-town camping weekend by loudly telling the mail carrier I was going off-grid again. I left my porch light off that Friday night, turned on the tub to preheat, and waited. By Sunday morning, the trap was set, and Karen, like clockwork, was about to walk straight into it. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that she wasn't coming alone this time. No, this time she was bringing a guest I hadn't planned for. Someone who would turn my petty revenge into a neighborhood-wide scandal that made next door light up like a Christmas tree. And oh boy, that's when things got real. Karen showed up Sunday morning wearing a smug little visor and carrying a cooler full of something fizzy. But she wasn't alone. This time, she brought reinforcements. 3 women from the HOA, including the lady who once tried to ticket a neighbor for leaving their trash can out 10 minutes past pickup, and a man I recognized as her creepy second cousin who seemed to hover at every HOA barbecue like a sentient paper plate. And then there was the 4th guest. Someone I hadn't expected at all, Mr. Halvorsen. The actual HOA president. Or, technically, the guy who was supposed to be, had Karen not staged a quiet little coup by convincing everyone else he was too old to keep up. The fact that he was here, in his polo shirt and sandals, carrying a folding chair and a Tupperware of deviled eggs, told me this wasn't just another hot tub brunch. This was a full-blown HOA-sanctioned backyard invasion. And it was happening right on schedule. I watched from my upstairs window, camera rolling, as they all shuffled into my backyard through the side gate. No knock. No text. Just a quick peek to make sure I wasn't home. Then they lowered themselves into the warm, welcoming, sabotaged waters of my private spa. Karen was the first in, of course. Queen Bee. She lowered herself with a satisfied sigh, like Caesar climbing into his chariot. Her crew followed. Giggles erupted. Corks popped. Glasses clinked. I could hear Karen from the security audio feed. Cheers to another beautiful HOA Sunday. And big thanks to Jake, our favorite off-the-grid nature boy, for making this possible. They had no idea what was coming. 10 minutes in, I saw it start. The water began to turn a rich, oceanic blue, not immediately obvious in the sunlight, but enough that one of the women paused mid-sip and squinted at her thighs. She ran a hand over her leg, frowned, and rubbed her fingers together. Karen waved her off. "It's just the jets," she said. "This tub always has a tint." That's when the chili oil kicked in. At first, it was subtle. a little shifting, some casual scratching. But then it escalated fast. The second cousin stood up suddenly, nearly slipped, and shouted something that was bleep-worthy even for a neighborhood wine brunch. Karen blinked, confused, and tried to wipe her arm. Too late. Her skin was turning blotchy. Angry red splotches started forming around her neck and chest. One of the other women shrieked and splashed backwards, bumping into Halvorsen, who looked more betrayed than alarmed, like the spa gods had forsaken him. Then came the burning. You don't realize how sensitive the human body is until you mix diluted ghost pepper extract into warm, aerated water. The jets only made it worse, circulating the oil in a full-body exfoliation of doom. They scrambled. Wine glasses went flying. Someone kicked the cooler. Karen practically launched herself out of the tub, slipping on the deck and falling on her side with a loud thump, blue water trailing behind her like she'd tried to wrestle a smurf. I waited 10 seconds, then walked calmly outside with my phone in hand and the Ring camera live feed already synced. Karen was hunched over, dripping, scratching her arms furiously while yelling at Halvorsen to call someone. One of the women was dabbing at her eyes with a pool towel. The second cousin was crouched on the lawn, cursing in what I think was German. I cleared my throat. Karen looked up, soaked, furious, and the exact shade of neon regret I had hoped for. "What the hell did you do to your tub?" she barked. I smiled. "You mean the tub on my private property that you broke into without permission? That one. You poisoned it," she shrieked. "My skin is on fire." I raised an eyebrow. "Nope. It's pool-safe dye and food-grade chili oil. Totally non-lethal. But you might want to avoid mirrors for a few days. That blue tint lasts a while." She stood up, wobbling. "I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said, holding up my phone. "I've got 4 days of footage of you breaking and entering. I'd love to file a report. Also, while we're at it, we should probably talk about your little unauthorized HOA newsletter. Pretty sure impersonating a board decision to involve a non-member's property without consent is a legal gray area. But hey, I'm no lawyer." Halvorsen, still pink and steaming like a boiled ham, slowly turned to her. "Wait, you told us he agreed." Karen froze. I assumed he wouldn't mind," she stammered. "You used HOA funds for this," he said flatly. Her eyes widened. "It was only snacks. And a few newsletters." "You used my name," I said, stepping closer. "You used my property. And now you've bathed the HOA board in chili dye." That's when one of the other women, Linda, I think, said quietly, "I'm gonna be blue for my granddaughter's baptism." And that's when the unraveling really began. Karen stormed off, trying to salvage her composure while dripping blue onto my deck. The others followed, muttering. Halvorsen lingered just long enough to apologize and mutter something about reviewing bylaws. Then he shuffled after them, carrying his folding chair and the very sad, untouched deviled eggs. I spent the next hour replaying the footage from every angle. Then I uploaded a highlight reel, Karen's grand entrance, her blue evolution, and the chaotic exodus, to a private link and sent it to a few trusted neighbors. One of them asked if they could post it to the neighborhood Facebook group. I shrugged. What could possibly go wrong? By Monday, the video had been shared 27 times. By Tuesday, it had hit next door. By Wednesday, someone turned it into a meme. My favorite was a screenshot of Karen mid-screen with the caption, "When the HOA says BYOB but forgets the don't sit in the engineer's hot tub clause." The fallout was swift and glorious. Karen tried to spin the narrative, claimed I had booby-trapped my own property in a targeted act of malice. She showed up at my door with a clipboard and a scowl, demanding I remove the footage and issue a public apology. I sipped my coffee and said, "Sure." Right after you explained to the rest of the board why you've been watering your lawn with water from my private well. She blinked. Oh yes. I hadn't forgotten. Months ago, I'd noticed a drop in water pressure and traced it to a suspicious hose running from a capped access point on the far side of my yard. Guess who'd quietly tapped into it under the cover of landscaping work? That's right. Karen. Her garden. A very one-sided arrangement. She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my phone. I have receipts, Karen. Water meter logs. Video. And a signed work order from the contractor you hired. She stared at me, furious, blue still faintly tinting her ears, and whispered, "You'll regret this." I smiled. "Not as much as you're about to. Because see, flushing her fake little regime out of my hot tub was just phase 1. The well? That was phase 2. And phase 3, a well, let's just say it involved sewage, a redirected sprinkler system, and a very awkward garden party. But we'll get to that. Because at this point, the war was on. And in a war against an HOA, Karen, you don't bring just petty revenge. You bring plumbing. By the time the blue dye incident reached peak meme status, Karen had gone from feared HOA queen to neighborhood punchline. The kind of punchline that made people cough into their drinks at block parties and exchange smirks when she jogged by in long sleeves, still trying to scrub off the last hints of turquoise. But she wasn't the kind of person to accept humiliation quietly. Karen wasn't just licking her wounds, she was planning a comeback. Unfortunately for her, I was already 3 steps ahead. Revenge was no longer enough. I wanted a full collapse, and she handed me the next phase on a silver platter. A day after her failed attempt to demand an apology, I received a very formal-looking letter in my mailbox. Not via email or HOA drop-off. No, this was hand-delivered, printed on faux parchment, and sealed with the HOA logo like some suburban royal decree. The letter claimed I was in violation of unsanctioned property modifications affecting the community aesthetic, citing my new security lights and motion cameras as a disruption to the visual harmony of the neighborhood. It ended with a proposed fine of $500 and a threat of escalating penalties. There was just one problem. I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. She knew it. I knew it. The board knew it. But Karen was betting that if she wrapped her threats in enough official-looking jargon, I'd either pay the fine or panic. Instead, I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Then I drove straight to Mr. Halvorson's house. He answered the door in socks and a golf shirt, looking like he'd aged 10 years since the chili dye incident. I didn't waste time. I handed him the letter. He read it, frowned, and asked, "She sent this herself?" I nodded. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like a man whose last nerve had just filed for early retirement. "She doesn't have the authority," he muttered. "She's been sending these to multiple households lately. I was told she'd stopped." "She hasn't," I said. "And if you want her out before she drags the entire board into a lawsuit, you might want to take a look at this." I pulled up my tablet and showed him the footage I'd been compiling, not just the hot tub incident, but months of Karen's sneaky HOA overreach. Unapproved inspections, threat letters, secret meetings. My personal favorite was her banging on a neighbor's door with a tape measure because their porch light was allegedly too warm in tone. Halvorson leaned back, silent. When I finished, he said, "Would you be willing to share that with the rest of the board?" "Gladly," I said. "Just let me know when." He called an emergency HOA board meeting that same week, and to my absolute joy, he invited me to present my case. Not as a member, but as a concerned neighbor and unwilling victim of HOA tyranny. I showed up with a neatly prepared digital presentation labeled Operation Karen Fallout and spent the next 20 minutes walking them through Exhibit A through Z. The newsletters, the forged signatures, the surveillance footage, the water theft. At one point, a board member gasped and said, "Wait, she was charging wine tastings to the landscaping budget?" The best part came near the end, when I played a clip of Karen saying, "Jake doesn't mind us using the tub, he's probably off hugging trees or whatever." The room went quiet. Then someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. Except Karen, who had shown up 10 minutes late and was now standing in the back, arms crossed, face unreadable. The vote to remove her was unanimous. Officially, she was relieved of her leadership role pending investigation, but everyone knew what that meant. She stormed out without a word. I followed at a polite distance, just to see where she was headed. She stomped across the street toward her house, muttering under her breath. I stood there for a moment, half expecting her to turn around and unleash a final insult. Instead, she flipped me off and slammed her front door. By the next morning, it was public. The HOA sent out a notice informing residents of Karen's removal and a pending audit of board funds. Suddenly, people weren't afraid to talk. A neighbor down the street told me Karen once threatened to report their son's treehouse as an unpermitted structure. Another said she'd measured the height of their grass with a ruler. Someone else admitted Karen tried to sell them custom HOA-compliant mailbox flags she printed at home. She had run the HOA like a one-woman monarchy, and now the peasants were in open rebellion. But just when it seemed like Karen was finally out of moves, she tried one last desperate play. She filed a petition with the county requesting to expand the HOA boundaries to include my property. I found out when a county clerk, baffled by the paperwork, called me to ask why someone had submitted a hand-drawn map with my house circled in red ink and labeled non-compliant parcel. I almost choked on my cereal. I drove straight to City Hall with my deed, property map, and a flash drive of video evidence. The clerk laughed so hard they called in their supervisor just to show them. They denied the petition on the spot and flagged Karen's file for future scrutiny. I asked for a copy of her submission. It was glorious. Scribbles, crossed-out clauses, and even a section labeled Property Annexation Strategy. She'd basically tried to stage a hostile HOA takeover like it was a military operation. Now, the gloves were off. I activated Phase 3. Remember how Karen had tapped into my private well to water her garden? Well, I'd had a professional plumber reroute that system and install a backflow valve to prevent any future tampering. Then I did one better. I had the waste line from an old, unused greywater tank temporarily redirected into the line she'd illegally connected. Just enough to flush it with a non-toxic but extremely unpleasant mix of sewage-laced runoff. It happened at 3:13 p.m. on a Tuesday. Karen turned on her sprinkler system and was promptly greeted with the smell of hot compost and despair. Her backyard turned into a horror movie. Brown mist sprayed across her hydrangeas. Her roses drooped like they'd given up on life. She ran outside in flip-flops, gagging, trying to yank the hose out of the ground. Too late. She called a plumber. Then she called the county. Then she called me. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to my backyard, sat in my now pristine, properly sealed hot tub, and toasted the sky with a chilled drink. Peace had returned. But something told me Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. And I was right. Because 2 days later, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just a single sentence typed in bold. You'll be sorry when the neighborhood hears what you did to the HOA funds. The war wasn't over. Karen had one last card to play. And if she thought I was going to fold, she had no idea who she was messing with. I read the anonymous letter 3 times, each time slower than the last. You'll be sorry when the neighborhood hears what you did to the HOA funds. That was rich, considering the only person in the neighborhood who had ever played Monopoly with actual HOA money was Karen. But still, the timing was calculated. Just as the storm had quieted, she was trying to flip the script and paint herself as the victim. Classic move. This wasn't just desperation. It was her final Hail Mary. And it told me one very important thing. She wasn't out of ammo yet. She was just reloading. I knew Karen wasn't dumb. Delusional, yes. Entitled beyond comprehension, absolutely. But not dumb. She knew she couldn't fight me on property lines or legal standing. She'd already lost that battle in front of the board and the county. But character? Public image? That was still her battlefield. And now she was coming for mine. The next morning, my neighbor Steve stopped me by the mailbox with a raised eyebrow. Hey man, a weird question. Did you really bill the HOA for your spa repairs? I blinked. What? He scratched the back of his neck. Karen's been telling people you filed a reimbursement request for damages. Something about claiming emotional trauma and replacing the hot tub water with imported mineral spring gallons. I laughed out loud. Loud enough that Steve took a step back. No, Steve. I didn't charge the HOA for anything. I didn't even bill them for the chili oil, and that stuff's not cheap. But the damage was starting. Over the next few days, rumors trickled in from all corners. That I had exploited the chaos to get a landscaping upgrade. That I'd claimed my spa was emotionally violated and needed spiritual cleansing. That I was trying to sue the HOA for mental anguish. Karen had weaponized the one thing she still had left: gossip. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I leaned in. I hosted a barbecue. But not just any barbecue. I called it the Jetstream Jubilee. A light-hearted celebration of clean water, clear boundaries, and honest neighbors. I printed custom flyers with a cartoon hot tub on them, complete with a smiley face and a tiny floating sign that said, "Private means private." I invited the whole street, HOA members and non-members alike. I even invited Halvorsen and Linda from the board. Hell, I even sent one to Karen. Not because I expected her to show, but because I wanted her to know she wasn't invisible. She was just irrelevant now. The turnout was better than I could have hoped. People came with coolers, side dishes, even their own lawn chairs. Someone brought a karaoke machine. It turned into a full-on neighborhood bash. And throughout the night, I kept things casual. I didn't push the story. I didn't show the footage. I just let people ask, and when they did, I told the truth with a grin and a touch of sarcasm. No embellishment needed. Karen had given me all the material. By sundown, the narrative had fully flipped. I wasn't the guy who went too far. I was the guy who stood up to a petty tyrant and got creative about it. The guy who protected his property, his peace, and made sure the rest of the neighborhood could breathe again. People shared their own Karen stories with me, things I'd never heard. One guy confessed that she once left a warning note on his windshield for parking at an angle suggestive of disorder. Another said she asked to inspect his backyard for fence alignment, whatever that means. By the end of the night, several neighbors had already floated the idea of nominating me to the board. I declined with a smile. I'm more of a backseat sabotage kind of guy, I said. But even as the party died down and the last sparks of the fire pit faded, I had a nagging sense that Karen hadn't played her final card. And sure enough, it came the next morning, not in the form of another letter, but in something far worse, a visit from a city compliance officer. He showed up in a white truck, clipboard in hand, and asked to inspect my hot tub setup. Apparently, there had been a complaint filed anonymously about improper drainage systems, unauthorized exterior lighting, and suspected greywater misuse. It was a kitchen sink complaint. Someone had thrown every code violation they could think of into a single form and hoped something would stick. I smiled, welcomed him in, showed him everything. Proper permits, water hookups, camera documentation. I even brewed him a cup of coffee while he inspected the valve connections. The man was professional but clearly annoyed that his time was being wasted. At the end, he handed me a clean report and said, "If you ever find out who filed this, let them know false reports can come with real consequences." Oh, I knew. And I had just enough patience left to make sure those consequences would be loud. That weekend, I filed a formal harassment complaint with the city. Attached all the anonymous notes, fake violations, and footage of Karen trespassing and tampering with water lines. I submitted a copy to the HOA board, the county records office, and, just for fun, the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Update. The jets are clear, but apparently the sewage lives on." Reactions flooded in. People were furious on my behalf. Not because of the prank itself, but because Karen couldn't just walk away. She couldn't lose with dignity. She had to scorch the earth on her way out. But by then, nobody was following her lead. She'd lost her power, her audience, and, as I later found out from Linda, even her voting rights within the HOA. Her membership had been suspended pending ethics review. And the final twist? Remember that tap into my well she rigged to water her prize roses? Well, after I shut that down and flushed the line, her garden started to dry up. Slowly, quietly, just enough that her once perfect flower beds turned patchy, wilted. The same week her sprinkler system was deemed contaminated and flagged for costly repairs, her front lawn won Most Improved from a local gardening group. The award came with a plastic gnome and a gift card to a home improvement store. She was not amused. She doesn't speak to anyone now. Walks with her head down. Still wears long sleeves. I hear she's been trying to sell the house, but word travels fast in a neighborhood like ours. Nobody wants to buy the former home of the chilly-dyed HOA dictator who tried to annex her neighbor's property and ended up with sewage in her hydrangeas. As for me, I still soak in my hot tub every Sunday just like before. Only now I've got a tiny floating sign that says, "Jets only, Karen's not welcome," and a rubber duck painted blue with a tiny crown. I call him Duke of Dye. Peace, as it turns out, doesn't always come from keeping quiet or turning the other cheek. Sometimes it comes from cameras, chlorine, chili oil, and a very well-timed party invitation. And as I sit back, cold drink in hand, jets bubbling at my feet, I raise a toast to suburban justice. Because when a fake HOA declares war on the wrong neighbor, all bets are off.